When civilization was young and tools for understanding the universe were unavailable, religion and government were one. Then came the age of enlightenment, factual knowledge of our world and our universe, and government by the people. In this country, radical right religionists believe that their Bible and biblical interpretations should supersede our democratic Constitution. They advocate prayer in school, which they claim will cure a myriad of social ills. Food for Thought Productions approached a leading community activist and proponent of quality public education, Ms Genethia Hayes, president of the Los Angeles School Board, for her views on this hotly contested issue. Ms. Hayes is also executive director of the Los Angeles Chapter, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Here is Ms. Hayes discussing her position on the question of prayer in public schools with our producer, Lee Baker.
Are opposed to prayer in public school, and what is the...
I'm opposed to prayer in public school, and yes, I am the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I am very much active in the life of a church. Mm-hmm. The danger for me, Lee, in prayer in public schools is that it is advocating one faith and advocating one religious perspective, mm-hmm. and that's dangerous in a pluralistic society. In America, in a democracy, if we say that this is a society where there is freedom of thought and freedom of speech, and that we in fact celebrate that as well as diversity and as well as religious freedom, the danger is having the state legitimize a particular religion. Mm-hmm. I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. Prayer in public schools, however, if it is Christian prayer, and if it is charismatic or fundamentalist, where does that leave the youngster who is Jewish? Where does that leave the youngster who comes from an Islamic background? Where does that leave the youngster who, for example, is of a Protestant faith, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventist, mm-hmm. a Buddhist, mm-hmm. Baha'is, Shintos? I mean, you know, you and I both know, Lee, there are many great religions in the world, all of which have value, moral and ethical principles that they want their congregants to follow.
However, we have a very high percentage of people in this country who are not religious, who are secular people, and democracy is really a secular instrument. It's based on everyone participating in what the laws and government shall be, and
so you're advancing my argument. That's another facet of the argument that I would mm-hmm. that I was coming to, but you have said it exactly the way in which I would have said it. Government should be in the business of organizing society in such a way that everyone has the opportunity to practice their faith, mm-hmm. free of any kind of censure and free of any kind of marginalization. Mm-hmm. Public policy should support that. Laws should support that. And of course the Constitution supports that. There's no need right. for a constitutional amendment. We already have religious freedom protected under the First Amendment.
That means that in a democracy, it is the will of the people what shall be in the laws and so
And it's the will of all of the people, Lee.
Right.
It can't
right.
be the will of a fraction of the people.
Now, you know, we have a very strong faction in the religious community that is the radical right, who has worked very hard to have religion in school. What percentage? As a matter of fact, I heard a statistic, there are about 1,500 different variations of religions in this mm-hmm. Country. Mm-hmm. What percentage of the Christians do you think the religious right might be?
You know, I tend to believe, I don't think that anybody has really done the kind of research and has the kind of data, but my sense of it is that the religious right and the moral majority people really are not in the majority. I think
right.
that they make up a very narrow slice of those people who operate in the religious community. I think that there are many more.
They make a lot of noise.
Well, they do make a lot of noise, Lee. The problem for me is that those of us who traditionally should be about the business of countering the challenge from the right, more than I'm comfortable with, are silent. It's almost as if we've decided that we're frightened to talk about religion. It's almost as though we think to ourselves that King, who actually is the face of the civil rights movement, was not a man of God. He was first a black Baptist preacher. And his decision was that there had to be a marriage of your sacred life with your secular behavior, and that issues of social justice also came with moral and ethical constructs, that you had to talk about these things within the context of what moral and ethical principles should be operative in a society.
Now, if we don't have prayer in school, you were saying earlier that these moral and ethical principles can still be taught in school,
well, I think
without the religious context.
Moral and ethical principles should be taught.
Yes.
I don't think that a certain brand of morality should be taught. But there is certainly the obligation within a public school to help youngsters to develop value systems,
Right.
to be able to think critically about moral and ethical dilemmas. Those can be presented within the curriculum and within the construct of a complete education. Young people should be forced to think critically about moral and ethical dilemmas that they are going to face. It is dangerous when you decide that you are going to say, this is the value, this is the value. It is dangerous when you say there is only one way to think about this, morally and ethically. If you disagree with me, then you're wrong. So my sense of it is that what you do is you allow children to develop the skill set that they need to do critical thinking, to analyze things so that they can determine between fact and fantasy. You give them, of course, I think, content that is rich with experiences that teach about a multitude of religions, a multitude of philosophies,
Right.
and what you do then is you make sure that that course content is so rich, and then the discussions are so rich that young people develop the capacity to understand their own ethical, moral, cultural values, but they also learn to value other people's ethical, cultural, and moral values.
Especially in today's world, and this area in particular, it's the multicultural landscape here is so diversified.
Well, and one of the things that I think is critical is I think that the nation is in fact watching California. And I think the nation specifically is watching Los Angeles, where there is probably more diversity within Los Angeles County or within Southern California than you probably are going to find any place in the country and probably any place in the world. We need to be about the business of not just giving lip service to diversity, but we need to be about the business of understanding how one goes about educating the next generation of citizens of California, of Los Angeles, of the nation, to grapple with and to deal with and to have dialogue and to be in conversation with other youngsters and other young
Other
people.
points of view.
So that by the time they are ready and by the time they are prepared to take their place in society, they have had an opportunity to think through these things. And they've had an opportunity to have their own thinking expanded. And they've had an opportunity to have to be educated. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I am also opposed to vouchers, and I'm opposed to the dismantling of the public education system here, because it is the one place where young people interact with other young people of very different backgrounds.
Right. Now, when you say that the voucher system is dismantling public education, could you explain that?
Well, it's very easy and it is very simplistic to say that everyone deserves the right to choose. I mean, that's the argument, is that the voucher system would allow folk to have parental choice. That's what they're calling it now. And that wealthy people already have this choice. And so therefore, all we're doing is we are, in fact, removing a choice from the poor. And on balance, Lee, that sounds great, but here's my question. If we realize that the public schools in this country are underfunded currently, and they are, it's not just the state of California, but much of the money has been taken out of public education.
And the vouchers takes money out.
And that's my point. So when the voucher takes more money from the public education institutions, what happens to the youngsters who are left? What happens to the youngsters who are left behind in a system that people are saying, I don't believe it's true, but people are saying and would like us to believe that public education is not doing its job, it's not meeting its mandate, it's not educating any child well. What is going to happen if we erode that system even further? What we wind up doing is we wind up taking tax dollars, public money, we're allowing it to flow into private institutions where there is no oversight by the general public, where we have nothing, in fact, to say about what the curricular offerings are or what the moral and ethical teachings might be. So we're taking tax dollars, public money, your money, my money, people from the religious right.
The specific is that that money doesn't come into the public education fund.
But then
with the
specifically,
vouchers.
what we need to be working on is to make sure that more of that money comes into the public education system.
That's right.
And
That's
that we
right.
are strengthening that system so that it is a system that we're all proud of. And it is a system that we understand then will educate all children well, and no child will be left behind.
Now, it's important to our whole society that all children be educated well, so they take their place as positive entities in our democratic system. I think there is a lot to lacking in these public schools where they don't have the same standards for the teachers that the public schools require, and they don't. It's too homogeneous. The student body is very
And homogeneity is a problem.
right.
Well,
They don't learn how to adapt to a multicultural society when they come out into the world.
and that's a danger. That is a danger to a free democratic system. When you are making sure that young people are only educated, because for me, the real challenge and the real test and the real job of education is not so much what you put into the youngster, but what you extrude from the youngster. And actually, that's what educate means. If
It's
you
to
look
draw
at it,
out.
it is to draw out. If you look at the Greek word that education comes from, it is really to extrude from people. So what you have to be careful about is, if young people are educated in systems where everybody believes the same thing, everybody feels the same way, it is a homogeneous community, how then do we expect them to
fit in.
continue the democratic process in a
That's right.
pluralistic society?
That's correct.
You know,
That's so true. Now, you were enumerating some wonderful things that should be included in our curriculums as far as developing critical thinking and ethical and moral ideas. Our teachers are not really prepared to add this on in many cases.
Well, I don't think that they are. But I am not of the opinion that what we ought to be doing is bashing public school teachers. I think what we ought to be doing is we ought to be looking at, within school systems, we ought to understand two things, Lee, as far as I'm concerned. The brand new teacher who comes out of even the best teacher training institution, and of course we also need to look at how teachers are trained, but that's a whole nother discussion and a whole nother show.
That's another show.
But the teacher who comes out of a teacher training institution and comes onto the job, whether it's a large urban school district, a small rural school district, it doesn't matter. That's a brand new teacher, and it's not a teacher who has been trained with anything but theory, methodology, and pedagogy. There has to be, within school systems, the real belief that those teachers must be provided with staff development and professional development every step of the way, so that they then are armed with the things that they need to be armed with, that they are supported. I do believe that teachers are critically important because they are preparing the next generation of Americans, and I think that they are absolutely underpaid, even public school teachers. I am always annoyed by the fact that baseball players and football players and basketball players, and I am not casting aspersions on the fact that I think all of these people probably have skills that they have spent many years. But the point I'm making is that without qualified, excellent, well-prepared teachers, you're not going to get the product that you're looking for. So that rather than badge teachers, my question would be, how do we support teachers? How do we, in fact, continually allow them to have the professional growth and development that they need to have to meet the challenges of this new education regime that has to happen?
Constantly changing world as well.
And because we really do need to understand that public education, we're asking teachers to do things in public education now that public education really was not designed or developed to do. Public education as it was thought about and as it was designed originally, it wasn't about preparing anybody's children to go to college. It really was about taking a nation of immigrants and in some way socializing them and acculturating them to the American way of life. We still, in this country, when public education was started, there was no thought given to the fact that the common man's child was going to go to college. That was something that happened with the wealthy, with folks who sent their children to private preparatory schools. It wasn't until the GI Bill came into place that college was something that was thought of for the masses of Americans. So we are absolutely asking public education to do a job, to reform itself, so to speak, and to do a job that it really wasn't designed initially to do. It was designed to make sure that people had a certain skill set, that they had a certain kind of civic responsibility and understanding. The economy was different. We were an industrialized society, so people could do very well in the coal mines and the steel mills, in factories, building cars.
Well, the vocational education was for job skills.
That's right.
Then the academic was more or less about history.
And,
All right.
and civics
what
and
you've
that sort
been
of thing.
talking about are skills in today's world.
Well, I think that young people now
Life skills
need
in
a
today's
skill
world.
set. And my separation between, which is also where I come, which is also how I feel about religion in the public schools. Schools are designed and should be designed and should be developed to teach skills. The application and the practical application and the practice of those skills has to happen outside of those schools, in homes, in families, in communities, in neighborhoods, so that the skill of learning how to read should be taught in school. Phonics, finding details, drawing inferences, drawing conclusions, all of the higher order thinking skills. It is then up to the family and the community to provide the youngster with a variety of opportunities to read.
Well, now the
And it's
family,
the same thing with values. It's the same thing with this whole issue of the whole notion of everything can't be laid at the schoolhouse door.
No, but I think the community can contribute to the school and after-school programs and in different ways.
Absolutely.
But, the family is very different from what the traditional family is supposed to be. In other words, in today's world, even with two parents, it takes two paychecks to support a family. In the majority of cases, there isn't a mother in the home who is there to do all these things with the children. Now, if we're counting on that,
I'm not sure, Lee, that everything was so great. I mean, it's real easy to think retrospectively. It's real easy to think that because the society looked like the Nelsons or Wally and the Beaver and June, the Cleaver family and that kind of stuff, I'm not necessarily sure that meant that everything was really okay.
that's great.
And that everybody's child was well taken care of. I think what you have to ask yourself, though, is that a problem of the school system, or is that a problem of public policy and legislation?
And the community.
And
I think public policy, legislation, and the community, because if a child isn't lucky enough to get these things in the home and in the family that we claim is the responsibility of the family, not every child has that opportunity. The society, our whole country, is responsible for that child.
That's right. So the question becomes, why is there not universal health care? Why do we not have Head Start for every youngster, irrespective of their socioeconomic grouping? What are we really talking about when we're talking about welfare reform, and how is that being reformed, and how is the safety net being removed from those who are most vulnerable in the society? Why do we not have some kind of universal national policy that says that a woman can leave her job, or a man can leave their job, to be engaged in raising youngsters, and then has the right to return to that job at the same level, at the same rate of pay, and even some kind of subsistency, if you will. It is not something that is not being done in other countries, in other nations where there is a more homogeneous society. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, if in fact we say, which is what the religious right says, and what the Christian Coalition says, and what all of these people talk about, strong family values, we believe in children, we believe in families, what are they doing, and what are the rest of us doing to impact those people who make policy and set laws? Why are we not all standing up and demanding universal health care, universal immunization for children? Why are we not demanding that there be quality child care? If in fact it takes 2 paychecks, and if in fact we understand that the loss of parents being involved and being focused on youngsters, that there has to be something else then that's set in place. Why do we have a shortage of quality daycare in this country? Why can we not afford to fund that? Why do we have a huge military budget that is a sacred cow?
Well, not only the military budget, but we have a tremendous expense as far as prisons and justice system is. There's a tremendous flow of money into that, and
I think in California, isn't it the fastest growing industry in the state of California, is the building of prisons and people who work in penal institutions. So rather than educating young people, I guess what we've opted for is preventive incarcerating young people, when we could actually be doing this on the other end. And kind of all of that is what I guess led me to do the panel discussion, and what has led me to want to come and talk to you.
Well, I'm really so glad you were on that panel and that I had a chance to bring you here.
Thank you very much.
We talked about the power of the minority in the Christian community that pushes for prayer in school.
Behavior.
And now I hear that the reason that the radical religious right speaks for the religious community, they are perceived as that because they are so obvious and they are so vocal. And people say that they have this kind of support, because I know they're a small percentage of the population, that they have this kind of support because they have this passion for their belief systems. So,
and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. In a democratic, pluralistic society, the fact that I might be, or you might be, or any other person in the society might be diametrically opposed to their agenda does not mean that they should not have the right to organize, nor does it mean that they should not have the right to put forth whatever that agenda might be. The response is what I'm bothered by. The fact that there are not other people who are just as passionate as I am, and who are not challenging the legislation, the public policies, the public thought, the information that they're putting into the media, the test, if you will. And the thing that is critically needed is that those folk who are also just as passionate about keeping the society as open and as free and as pluralistic, dignifying all points of view as we possibly can from a religious base, we need to hear those voices. Just as vibrant, just as passionate, just as willing to stand and say, but I also am a Christian, or I also am a Jew, or I also am a whatever your religious affiliation, but I speak of Christianity because it is the Christian right that is pushing this agenda. Other Christians must step up to the plate and say, no, I'm sorry, but you don't speak for us. And no, we're sorry, but that is not how we feel. We are not interested in limiting. We are not interested in a theocracy. And we are passionate Christians.
And passionate for democracy.
But we are also understanding the need for this democracy, which is fragile at best, which is difficult to control, if you will. I mean, freedom is the most difficult kind of a society to rule, simply because what we're saying is we want the greatest amount of freedom, we want the greatest amount of people's voices to be heard. So it is very difficult to manage. But that's what we ought to be saying also as Christians. We ought to be saying that that's what we're brokering for. We are not interested in a slate of people who feel exactly the way we do. We are willing to take the risk of allowing other voices to be heard, and then to be in struggle and conversation and dialogue with those voices until we finally reach a consensus and we finally can stand on some piece of common ground. And I think, Lee, personally, I think there are far more Christians who feel the way I do than there are who would like to see things limited, who would like to see us go to this place where there's only one religious point of view. There's only one religious voice that is valid.
We talked about strategies for implementing our point of view.
We are the government.
That's
the people
right.
are the government.
That's
It's not about the government being some entity over here and the people being over
I
here.
like to use the expression that when we elect people to work for us,
They work for us.
they should work for us, and that we have to supervise what they're doing.
That's right. Because you can't expect what you don't inspect. If you're not going to inspect it, if you're not going to determine what your representatives, what your employees, so to speak, are doing in your behalf,
Right.
then it would be the same as in any other job. We wouldn't allow that to happen in corporate America. I certainly wouldn't allow that to happen with employees at SCLC. We certainly wouldn't allow that to happen with any other group of people who have a job to do and have a responsibility to do. What we need to begin to understand is that a large percentage of our tax dollars go to pay the salaries of people that we elect to, in fact, look after our interests.
That's right.
And so we need to be about the business of inspecting their performance and holding them accountable to whatever it is that they say that they believe in and that they're going to go and fight for and struggle for and try to win, that in fact increases the public good.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.